The ballroom was glowing that night, full of light, laughter, and the sound of people talking over the soft notes of a piano. Golden chandeliers hung high above, spilling warm light across polished floors and mirrors that made everything look even grander. The air smelled of perfume, wine, and roses from the tall vases placed on every table. Waiters moved quickly but quietly, serving sparkling drinks and tiny plates of food to guests dressed in their finest clothes. In the middle of this glittering world stood Elena Moreau, the young woman everyone came to see. She was beautiful, confident, and dressed in a stunning blue gown that caught the light every time she moved. Tonight was her charity gala, an event her family held every year to raise money for the arts. But to many people it was more about being seen than helping anyone. The rich and powerful of the city gathered here to talk, show off, and pretend to care about music and culture. Elena smiled as she moved among the guests, greeting old family friends and shaking hands with men who praised her father's business. Her laugh was polite, her words practiced. She had grown up in this world of chandeliers and expensive shoes. She knew exactly how to smile for every kind of person. The politician, the businessman, the artist who was invited just for decoration. Inside, though, she felt a little bored. These parties always looked magical from the outside but felt empty once you were in them. At the far corner of the room, partly hidden behind the crowd, a man in gray was quietly mopping the floor near the entrance. His name was Liam Carter, one of the janitors who worked for the hotel. He was careful not to get in anyone's way. Every time he heard laughter, he stepped back, making sure not to draw attention. His uniform was clean but plain, and his hands were rough from work. He looked up now and then at the shining chandeliers and the piano's glossy surface, but only for a second before going back to his task. Liam loved music, though no one there would have guessed. When he was younger, he had dreamed of being a pianist, but dreams don't always survive in the real world. Life had taken him down a different road, a hard one, full of small jobs and quiet days. Still, whenever he was near a piano, something inside him stirred. Tonight, that feeling was stronger than ever. He could hear the tune being played and imagine how he would play it differently, softer here, slower there, with more feeling. As the evening went on, the room grew louder and brighter. People clinked glasses, told stories, and laughed too loudly. Elena's friends surrounded her, young men in tuxedos and women with shining jewelry. They teased each other, showing off their charm and wit. Elena laughed too, but her laughter was more habit than joy. She had learned how to smile at the right time, how to look amused even when her mind was elsewhere. Her father stood nearby, talking proudly about the family's success. Everyone admired him, and Elena had spent her whole life trying to live up to that image, the perfect daughter of a perfect family. But sometimes she wished for something real, something that wasn't planned or polished. She didn't know what that was, but she could feel the emptiness behind all the glitter. At that moment, she noticed the janitor again. Liam had moved closer, wiping a small spill near the piano. Something about his quiet presence caught her attention, maybe because he was the only person in the room who didn't seem to be pretending. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just doing his job, steady and calm. Elena found herself watching him for a few seconds longer than she meant to before her friend pulled her back into conversation. "Don't stare too much, Elena," her friend whispered with a playful smile. "People might think you're falling for the help." They both laughed lightly, but there was a sharpness in her friend's tone that made Elena uncomfortable. She didn't mean anything cruel, but that was how people in her world spoke, as if anyone who worked for them was invisible. The music changed to a faster tune. A pianist hired for the night played skillfully and couples began to dance. The women's gowns flowed like colored waves as they moved across the marble floor. Elena watched them, smiling, but inside she felt a strange pull toward the piano. Not to dance, but to listen, really listen. The melody reminded her of something, though she couldn't quite name it. Liam paused his cleaning and looked up, just for a moment, at the pianist's hands. His heart ached with longing. His fingers twitched slightly as if they still remembered how it felt to press the keys. He turned away quickly, afraid someone might notice. The night sparkled on and laughter filled the hall again. Elena raised her glass to toast her guests, her smile bright and perfect. But as her eyes swept across the room, they met Liam's for a brief second. Something unspoken passed between them. Not recognition, not even understanding, just a flicker of awareness. Two people from different worlds, caught for a heartbeat in the same light. She didn't know then that this small, passing moment would change everything, that by the end of the night, her laughter would echo back at her in a way she'd never forget. The music slowed, and the soft hum of conversation filled the ballroom again. The pianist had just finished his final piece for the evening, and guests clapped politely before turning back to their champagne glasses and gossip. The night was reaching that moment when laughter grew louder, words became looser, and people started saying things they might not mean. Elena stood near the piano, surrounded by her small circle of friends. Her blue gown shimmered as she leaned casually against the edge of the instrument, smiling at something one of the young men had said. Her friends were teasing, playful, and just a little bit cruel in the way people could be when they were too comfortable. "Go on, Elena," said Victor, a tall man with slicked back hair and a confident smirk. "You've been praising the pianist all night. Why don't you play something for us? Surely you can handle a few notes." Elena laughed lightly, pretending to think. "Oh, please. I haven't touched a piano in years," she said, brushing the idea away with a graceful wave of her hand. Another girl, Clara, added with a grin. "You used to be good, didn't you? Remember when your teacher said you had real talent?" Elena shrugged, smiling but feeling a faint sting inside. That teacher had been her mother years ago, before life became too full of business dinners and expectations. "I was decent," she admitted, "but only because my mother made me practice every morning." The group chuckled, sipping their drinks. Then Victor's eyes flicked toward the man near the corner, the janitor who was carefully polishing a brass handle near the piano. He looked out of place amid the glitter and elegance. His clothes were plain gray, his apron slightly wrinkled, his yellow gloves bright against the polished surfaces. Victor smirked and nodded toward him. "Maybe he can play instead," he said mockingly. "He's been standing near the piano all night. Maybe he's dying to give it a try." The others laughed. The sound was sharp, echoing across the marble floor. Elena turned her head to see what Victor meant. Liam Carter, the janitor, had frozen mid-step, his hand still holding the cloth. He didn't say a word, just kept his head down, pretending not to hear. Elena's smile faltered. She didn't like the tone of Victor's voice, but the attention of the group was on her now, and their laughter pushed her to play along. "Oh, come on," Victor teased. "Why not ask him? Let's see what talent hides among the help." Elena hesitated, caught between embarrassment and the need to keep up the light mood. Her pride took over before her kindness could. She straightened her back, lifted her chin slightly, and said with a playful smirk, "Fine, Victor. Let's make this interesting." She turned toward the janitor and said in a teasing tone, "You there, do you play piano?" The room grew quieter. A few nearby guests turned to look, curious about what was happening. Liam slowly looked up, surprised to be spoken to. "Ma'am?" he asked softly, his voice steady but unsure. Elena gave a small, dramatic smile, the kind people wear when they think they're being charming. "I said, do you play the piano? If you do, come show us. And if you play something beautiful—" She paused for effect, eyes sparkling mischievously. "Then I'll marry you." Her friends burst out laughing. The sound rippled across the room, drawing even more attention. People turned, whispering and smiling, thinking it was all in good fun. Liam's face didn't change much, but his eyes held a quiet depth, like he was weighing something behind them. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the piano, then at Elena. The laughter around him echoed like distant noise fading into the background. Elena expected him to laugh it off, to shake his head awkwardly and go back to cleaning. That's what everyone expected. But instead he took a slow breath, pulled off his yellow gloves, and folded them neatly on the piano bench. The laughter began to fade as people realized he wasn't joking. He spoke quietly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "All right," he said. "I'll play." The room fell silent. Even Victor's smirk disappeared. Elena blinked, unsure what to do now. She had made a joke, a light-hearted dare meant to make her friends laugh. But suddenly it didn't feel funny anymore. Liam sat down at the piano. His gray uniform looked strange against the shining black surface. But his posture was calm, confident. He placed his fingers on the keys with the careful familiarity of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Elena felt her heart beat faster, her palms growing cold. Then he began to play. The first note was soft, almost a whisper. but it carried through the ballroom like a voice everyone instantly recognized but couldn't place. The melody was gentle yet full of emotion, each note flowing into the next like water. Conversation stopped completely. Glasses were lowered. The chandeliers seemed to shimmer differently now, reflecting the rhythm of his music. Elena's laughter died on her lips. The tune pulled at something deep in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. It sounded familiar, heartbreakingly so, and she realized with shock that she had heard it before. Her mother used to hum this melody when Elena was a child, late at night when the house was quiet and full of peace. Her throat tightened. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Liam's face was calm, his eyes closed, his hands moving gracefully across the keys. He wasn't playing for the crowd or for her. He was playing for the music itself. When the last note faded, the room stayed silent. No one laughed now. No one moved. Then slowly, applause began, soft at first, then stronger, until the hall was filled with clapping hands and astonished faces. Elena's own hands trembled. She didn't clap. She only stared at him, speechless, the echo of her careless words ringing in her ears. "Play, and I will marry you," she had said. But now, as she looked at the man before her, the janitor who played like a soul speaking, she felt something shift deep inside her. It wasn't a joke anymore. The ballroom stood frozen in a strange, almost sacred silence. No one moved. The sound of the last piano note still seemed to hover in the air, shimmering like invisible dust. The chandeliers above sparkled faintly, their light glinting off the polished black piano where Liam still sat, hands resting lightly on the keys. For a few long seconds it felt as if time had stopped. The same people who had laughed moments ago now stared quietly, unsure of what to do. The man they had mocked, the janitor with yellow gloves and a gray apron, had just filled the room with a beauty they didn't expect to find here. Elena stood rooted to the floor. Her heart was racing, her glass trembling slightly in her hand. She didn't understand what had just happened. She had only meant to joke to make her friends laugh, but something about that music had reached deep inside her. It wasn't just good, and it was alive. Every note seemed to carry a piece of truth, something too pure for this polished world of smiles and champagne. Liam finally opened his eyes. He looked around the silent crowd, calm and steady, though a quiet storm swirled inside him. He hadn't planned to play. He had only wanted to finish his work and go home. But something about that careless laughter had pulled him to the piano, not out of anger, but out of something deeper. Maybe pride, maybe the need to remind himself that he was more than a uniform and a mop. His gaze met Elena's. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. His eyes were not angry, not even cold, and just full of quiet strength. It made her feel small, almost ashamed. The room seemed to fade around them. Then someone clapped. It was a single, hesitant sound. An older woman near the back, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Then another joined in. And another. Within seconds, the whole ballroom erupted into applause. Not the polite kind given to hired musicians, but real, heartfelt applause. People stood up. Some whistled, others cheered, but Liam didn't smile. He simply stood, nodded politely, and put his gloves back on. The applause only made him feel more distant, as if they were clapping for the performance, not the person. He had poured his soul into the keys, and now it was done. That was enough. He turned to leave quietly. Elena blinked, almost startled by the sudden motion. "Wait," she whispered, though her voice was too soft to reach him. He walked back toward the cleaning cart, blending once again into the background the way he always did. Her friends, still amazed, started to talk all at once. "My God, did you hear that? He plays like a professional!" Was that really the janitor? Elena's closest friend laughed awkwardly, trying to lighten the moment. "Well, Elena," she teased, "you did say you'd marry him if he played." But this time the joke didn't land. The laughter that followed was thin, uncertain. Elena didn't laugh. She just stared at the piano, her thoughts a tangle of confusion and wonder. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "That song," she murmured almost to herself. It sounded so familiar. Her father, who had been watching from across the room, stepped closer. He looked at her with raised eyebrows. "You recognized it too, didn't you?" he said softly. "Your mother used to play that piece when you were little." It was her favorite. Elena froze. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Her mother's song, that gentle, haunting melody, the one she hadn't heard since childhood. She turned sharply toward Liam, who was now at the far end of the room picking up a bucket and quietly leaving through the side door. The room buzzed with conversation again, but Elena could barely hear it. Her thoughts were miles away. How could he know that song? Her father patted her shoulder absently before going off to greet more guests, but Elena stayed where she was, watching the door through which Liam had disappeared. Her chest felt tight. Something inside her was pulling, a strange mix of curiosity, guilt, and an emotion she couldn't quite name. The gala continued, but the sparkle had dulled. The laughter no longer rang the same. Even the chandeliers seemed to shine softer. Guests went back to their small talk, though now and then, one or two would mention that incredible janitor who'd just played like a master. Elena drifted toward the piano. The lid was still open, the keys faintly gleaming under the light. She reached out and touched one softly. It made a quiet sound, just a note, but it echoed through her. Her reflection shimmered on the piano's surface. She hardly recognized herself. The confident, joking woman from earlier now looked unsure, almost fragile. For the rest of the night, she couldn't stop thinking about that song, about how each note had felt like a story being told without words. And most of all, she couldn't stop seeing Liam's calm face as he played, lost in the music, untouched by the world's laughter. When the gala ended, Elena lingered behind while the staff began cleaning up. The laughter had faded, replaced by the soft rustle of people leaving. She stood near the piano staring at it one last time. The janitor who had been invisible just hours ago had somehow changed everything, not by words or looks, but by sound. His music had cracked something open in her heart, something she hadn't even realized was locked away. As she left the hall, she caught a glimpse of him again, carrying cleaning supplies down the corridor. For a second, their eyes met once more. She wanted to say something, to apologize, to thank him, to ask him how he knew that song, but the words wouldn't come. He just nodded slightly, a quiet acknowledgement, then turned back to his work. Outside, the night air was cool and still. The stars above seemed distant yet alive, just like the music she still heard in her mind. And as Elena stepped into her waiting car, she whispered to herself, "Who are you, really?" She didn't know it yet, but that question, and that night, would follow her far beyond the walls of the ballroom. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Elena's curtains, bright and warm, but her thoughts were still trapped in the night before. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing that melody over and over again in her mind. Every note replayed perfectly, as if the piano were right there beside her. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, calm, serious, lost in the music. For the first time in years, she felt small. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made her realize how much of life she had missed behind her fancy walls and perfect smiles. The gala had gone perfectly, at least on paper. The guests had been pleased. Donations had come in. Her father was proud. Yet all she could remember was him, the janitor who had sat down at her piano and turned a careless joke into something unforgettable. By noon, she was still lost in thought. She sat at her vanity table, brushing her hair slowly, when a soft knock came at her door. "Elena, darling, are you awake?" It was her father's voice. "Yes, Papa, come in." He entered with his usual confident smile, holding the morning paper. "You should see this," he said, placing it in front of her. On the society page was a picture from the gala. Elegant guests, bright chandeliers, and right in the center, a man sitting at the piano in a gray uniform. The caption read, "The janitor who stole the show." Elena blinked in surprise. "They actually wrote about it?" "Of course they did," her father chuckled. "Everyone's talking about it. Apparently Mr. Carter, that's his name, Liam Carter, has quite the story. The hotel manager told me he used to study music when he was young. Life just didn't go his way." Elena stared at the photo again. His hands looked gentle, steady. "Mr. Carter," she repeated softly. "He really did play beautifully." Repeated softly. "He really did play beautifully." Her father nodded. "He did. Reminded me of your mother, actually. The way he played, it had feeling." His voice softened at the mention of her mother who had passed away years ago. Do you remember the song she used to play for you when you couldn't sleep? Elena nodded slowly. Yes, it was the same one. Her father smiled sadly. She loved that piece. Used to play it every morning. I almost forgot how it sounded, until last night. When he left the room, Elena sat quietly, staring out the window. The city outside moved on with its noise and speed, but she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet strength in Liam's music. How had he learned that song? Why had he played that one? Later that day, unable to stop herself, she decided to visit the hotel again. She told her driver it was to check on the staff and make sure everything had gone well after the event. But in truth, her heart had another reason. When she arrived, the ballroom looked different in daylight, empty, silent, and almost ordinary without the people and lights. The piano still stood there, its lid closed now, catching a faint reflection from the tall windows. A cleaner was polishing the floor near the stage. Elena asked gently, "Excuse me, is Mr. Carter here today?" The woman looked up, surprised. "Liam? Oh, yes, ma'am. He's downstairs in the storage room, I think." Elena hesitated, then thanked her and walked toward the narrow staircase that led to the lower floor. Her heels clicked softly on the steps. The air down there smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and floor wax. She could hear faint humming from one of the rooms, a tune she recognized immediately. She followed the sound and stopped at the open doorway. There he was, Liam, sitting on a wooden stool, repairing a broken mop handle. His sleeves were rolled up and he looked focused, unaware that someone was watching him. The tune he was humming was the same melody he had played last night. Elena took a breath and stepped closer. "You played beautifully last night," she said quietly. Liam looked up, startled for a second. "Miss Moreau." He stood quickly, wiping his hands on his apron. "I didn't expect—" "It's Elena," she interrupted softly. "Please, just Elena." He nodded, unsure what to say. The silence between them was awkward but not unpleasant. "I wanted to thank you," she continued. "That song, it meant a lot to me. My mother used to play it. I haven't heard it since she passed away." Something flickered in Liam's eyes, surprise then understanding. "I know," he said after a pause. "Your mother taught it to me." Elena's breath caught. She taught you?" He nodded. "Years ago. I used to work at your house, cleaning, sometimes fixing things. She heard me humming once and asked if I liked music. When I told her I did, she showed me how to play. Said that music should never belong only to those who can afford it." For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt heavy with memories. Elena's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. "I was just a child then," she whispered. "But I remember someone used to play softly in the afternoons when she was home. I thought it was her." Liam smiled gently. "Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was me practicing while she sang along." Elena wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "I said something cruel last night," she admitted. "And I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I know," he said simply. "People don't always mean what they say when they're trying to make others laugh." His words weren't bitter. They were calm, almost kind. And that made her guilt burn even more. She struggled for words. "You reminded me what real music sounds like. It's not about fancy parties or famous names. It's about feeling." Liam nodded, a small smile forming. "That's what your mother said too." They stood there, the soft light from the small window falling on the piano keys in the distance. It was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Finally, Elena asked, "Will you play again sometime?" He shrugged lightly. "If there's a piano that needs playing." She smiled, but her eyes were thoughtful. Something had changed between them. Something gentle and real. As she left the hotel, she glanced back once. Liam was standing by the doorway watching her go, his expression unreadable. But she knew one thing for certain. That one song played in a moment of pride and pain had connected two very different lives in a way neither of them could forget. And for the first time in years, Elena felt that the world, with all its differences and distances, might still have room for something true. Elena could not stop thinking about Liam's words. "Your mother taught it to me." They echoed in her mind like a soft whisper that refused to fade. That night, after returning home, she sat by the old piano in her family's sitting room, the same one her mother had once played. It had been silent for years, covered with a white cloth and dusted only by servants. Elena slowly lifted the cover and pressed one key. The sound was slightly out of tune, but it still made her chest tighten with emotion. As she sat there, her memories began to come alive. Her mother's gentle laugh, her soft hands guiding Elena's little fingers across the keys, the smell of flowers from the open balcony. And in those memories she saw a young man standing quietly in the corner, a janitor smiling shyly as her mother showed him a few chords. She had never paid attention back then, but now she understood. That man had been Liam. Tears filled her eyes. "How strange," she whispered. "All this time and I never knew." The next morning she went to see her father again. He was in his study reading the newspaper. "Papa," she said softly, "did you know Mother used to teach Liam Carter piano?" He looked up thoughtful. "Liam Carter." He paused, searching his memory. "Ah, yes. I remember him. He worked here for a short while years ago. Hard-working boy. Your mother liked him. Said he had a gift." He smiled faintly. "But then she fell ill, and after she passed I let most of the old staff go." "I suppose he disappeared after that?" Elena nodded slowly. "He didn't disappear. He stayed near the music. He works at the hotel now." Her father sighed. "Life isn't always fair, Elena. Talent doesn't guarantee success. Sometimes the world looks away from the ones who deserve to be seen." His words stayed with her long after she left the room. That evening, she returned to the hotel again. The manager greeted her politely, surprised but pleased. "Miss Moreau, we didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I was hoping to speak with Liam Carter," she said. "Is he here today?" "Yes, ma'am," the manager replied. "He's finishing up some work in the back. Shall I call him?" She nodded, her heart beating faster for reasons she didn't understand. Liam appeared a few minutes later, still in his gray uniform, carrying a bucket. When he saw her, he stopped, slightly startled. "Miss Moreau," he said, bowing his head politely. "It's Elena," she reminded him gently. "Please," he nodded once, his voice calm. "All right, Elena." There was a small pause. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday, about my mother." Liam looked down, his fingers tightening around the handle of the bucket. "She was kind to me," he said softly. "Kind in a way most people aren't. She treated me like a person, not a servant. When she heard me playing on an old broken piano at the back of the house, she didn't laugh. She listened." He smiled faintly, lost in the memory. "She said I had something special. I didn't believe her, but she made me promise to keep playing no matter what." Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. "She must have cared about you a lot." "She did," he admitted, "but not in a way people would gossip about. It was human kindness. She believed everyone had music inside them. We just need someone to hear it." Elena's eyes grew wet. "She used to tell me the same thing when I was little. I never really understood it, not until now." Liam looked at her quietly. "She loved you very much, you know. She talked about you all the time. Said you had her fire." Elena gave a shaky laugh. "I'm not sure she'd say that now. I made a fool of myself the other night." He shook his head gently. "No, you just forgot for a moment that people aren't so different. We all do." His words hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, embarrassed. "You're very forgiving." "I don't have much reason not to be," he said simply. "Holding anger doesn't change anything. But music and music does." For a moment they both stood in silence. The hotel lights were dim, the air soft with the smell of polished wood and soap. In the distance the ballroom stood empty, its grand piano still gleaming under the faint glow. "Would you play again?" Elena asked suddenly. "Just once more." "For me?" Liam hesitated. "I shouldn't. Not while I'm working." "I'll tell the manager you're on a break," she said with a small smile. "Please." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "All right." They walked back to the ballroom together. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty hall. When they reached the piano, Liam sat down slowly. He took a deep breath and began to play. The same melody filled the air again, the song her mother had loved. But this time it felt different, softer, more personal. Elena closed her eyes and let it wash over her. It was as if her mother was there again. Her laughter, her warmth, her gentle voice saying, "Listen, my dear. Feel the music." When the last note faded, Elena opened her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's like she's still here," she whispered. Liam looked up, his own eyes shining faintly. "That's what music does. It keeps people alive even when they're gone." "That's what music does. It keeps people alive even when they're gone." She nodded slowly, unable to speak. Then suddenly she realized something. Something that made her heart twist. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling. "That song, my mother wrote it, didn't she?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, she wrote it for you. She said it was your song, the sound of her love for her daughter." Elena covered her mouth, trying not to cry. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought it was just a tune she liked." Liam smiled softly. "Now you know, and now it's yours to remember." The silence that followed was deep and full. Not awkward, but sacred. Two people stood there connected by the same music, the same woman who had touched both their lives. And as the evening light faded through the tall windows, Elena realized something she hadn't before. Life wasn't about status, money, or how the world saw you. It was about the small, quiet ways people touched each other's hearts, often without even meaning to. That night, when she finally left the hotel, she didn't look back. But the melody followed her home, gentle and endless, like her mother's voice whispering through the music. That night, Elena sat by her bedroom window, the city lights flickering below like restless fireflies. She couldn't sleep. The melody still played in her mind, gentle and haunting, wrapping around her thoughts like a ghost that refused to leave. It wasn't just the music that kept her awake. It was everything that came with it. The truth about her mother, the memory of Liam's calm eyes, the way his words had stripped away everything fake about her world in one simple sentence. She thought about her life, the endless galas, the careful smiles, the people who pretended to care. For so long, she had lived inside a glass house built from her family's name and money. It looked beautiful from the outside, but it was fragile and hollow on the inside. And now, after meeting Liam again, she could finally see the cracks in that glass. She leaned her head against the window and whispered, "What have I been doing all this time?" Down in the streets, a street musician played a violin softly and the sound drifted up to her window. It was imperfect and a few missed notes, a rough edge here and there, but it was real. It made her smile through her tears. For the first time in years, she wanted something real too. The next morning, she decided to visit her mother's old studio, a small, dusty room at the back of the family mansion. The door creaked when she opened it. Everything was exactly as her mother had left it. The faded curtains, the scattered music sheets, the little stool by the piano. Elena ran her hand across the old keys, her fingers trembling slightly. She picked up a yellowed page of handwritten notes, her mother's handwriting. At the top, written neatly, were the words, "For my daughter, the light in my song." Elena pressed the paper to her chest, tears welling up again. "Oh, Mama," she whispered. "I wish I'd listened more." She sat at the piano and tried to play the melody Liam had performed, but her fingers stumbled. She laughed quietly through her tears. "I'm terrible," she muttered. Then she remembered what Liam had said. Music doesn't care where you come from. It just asks if you mean it, so she tried again, slowly, carefully. The notes weren't perfect, but they were honest. The sound filled the small room, warm and soft. For a brief moment, she felt her mother's presence beside her, like a soft hand resting on her shoulder. Over the next few days, Elena found herself thinking less about parties and more about music. She went to the hotel often, under the excuse of business follow-ups, but everyone knew it wasn't really about that. She would find reasons to wander near the ballroom or pass by the storage room, hoping to see Liam. Sometimes they spoke, short conversations about the piano, about her mother, about music. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Just a small smile in passing, and that was enough. But every time she saw him, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Calm. It was strange how someone so quiet could make the whole world seem more peaceful. One afternoon, she found him in the ballroom again, fixing a chair leg near the piano. The sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in golden light. "Do you ever regret not becoming a musician?" she asked. He paused, thinking. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But life doesn't always go where you expect it to. Music isn't something I lost, though. It's still here." He tapped his chest lightly. "You don't need a stage to feel it." Elena smiled softly. "That's beautiful," he chuckled. "It's just the truth." She walked closer, her shoes clicking gently on the marble floor. "You know," she said, "you've changed how I see things." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "Yes," she said simply. "I used to think I understood everything. People, success, happiness. But I didn't. I was surrounded by things that looked perfect but felt empty. Then you played that song and it was like someone opened a window I didn't know was shut. Liam looked away shyly. I didn't mean to teach you anything. But you did, she insisted gently. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that beauty doesn't belong to money or names or places. It belongs to people who feel deeply, people like my mother. People like you? Liam smiled faintly. Your mother believed that too. There was silence for a while. The light from the chandeliers flickered softly, and dust floated in the air like tiny stars. Finally, Elena said, I want to do something for you. You deserve to play. Not just for yourself, but for others to hear. You could teach, perform, people would listen. He shook his head slowly. It's not that simple, Elena. I don't belong in that world. Why not? She asked a bit too quickly. Because you clean floors instead of standing on a stage? Because you don't wear a suit? He smiled at her fire. Because people see what they want to see, he said softly. And that's all right. I play for myself. I don't need more. But Elena wasn't convinced. You deserve more, she said, her voice trembling slightly. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, Sometimes the greatest gift is to be heard just once, truly heard. I've already had that. Elena's heart ached at his words. She wanted to argue, to insist, but she realized something. Liam was content. He had peace, and she, for all her luxury, was still learning what that meant. She looked at him, her eyes full of respect. You're a better person than most people I know, Liam. He smiled softly. Maybe. Or maybe I just learned what matters the hard way. They both laughed quietly, the tension fading. As she left the ballroom that day, Elena felt lighter, but also more awake. She finally understood something her mother had tried to teach her long ago. The heart that listens is richer than the hand that owns. That realization changed everything. She no longer saw the hotel as a place for rich guests and invisible workers. She saw it as a place full of stories, of people whose worth wasn't written on paper. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, she knew one thing for certain. She would never laugh at anyone's dream again. Because somewhere between her world of gold and his world of dust, she had found something more valuable than either. She had found truth. That evening, the sky was painted in shades of orange and gold. The city lights were just beginning to glow, and Elena stood by her balcony, holding a letter she had written and rewritten a dozen times. The words were simple, but they came from a place she hadn't known existed before. Honest, humble, real. She wanted to apologize to Liam properly. Not with fancy words or gifts, but with the truth. She had hurt him with her careless laughter, and no matter how much kindness he had shown since then, she couldn't rest until she had said what her heart needed to say. She took a deep breath, folded the letter neatly, and decided she would give it to him in person. When she arrived at the hotel, the lobby was quieter than usual. A few guests chatted near the entrance and soft music played in the background. She walked to the reception desk and asked, "Is Liam Carter working this evening?" The receptionist nodded. "Yes, Miss Moreau. He's cleaning the upper ballroom right now." "Thank you," she said with a polite smile, her heart racing a little faster. As she climbed the grand staircase, she could already hear faint sounds, the soft squeak of a mop, the gentle clinking of buckets. When she reached the top, she saw him there, standing near the big windows, cleaning the last of the glass panes. The sunset poured in behind him, painting his figure in warm light. "Liam," she called softly. He turned, surprised, then smiled slightly. "Elena, I didn't expect you tonight. I hope I'm not disturbing you." He shook his head. "No, not at all. What brings you here?" She took a step closer, her hands trembling slightly. "I needed to say something I should have said a long time ago." Liam looked curious but stayed silent, letting her speak. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice shaking. "That night at the gala, I was foolish. I laughed without thinking, without realizing that my words could hurt someone who had done nothing wrong. You didn't deserve that, Liam." He said nothing, just watched her quietly. She continued, "I grew up surrounded by people who think they're better than others just because they have money or names that sound important. I became one of them without even noticing. But when you played that song, When I heard the way you made the piano come alive, when it made me see how blind I've been. Her eyes glistened. You showed me that real worth doesn't come from status, it comes from soul. From heart. Liam put down his cloth and leaned gently against the piano. His expression was calm, but his eyes were soft. You don't have to apologize, Elena, he said quietly. I never held it against you. I know, she said quickly. But I need to. Because if I don't, I'll never forgive myself. He smiled faintly. All right then. Apology accepted. The simplicity of his words made her smile too. It was as if the weight she'd been carrying finally lifted. For a moment they both stood there, watching the sun sink behind the city skyline. The light danced across the piano's glossy surface, painting their reflections together in gold. Elena glanced at the piano and said softly, You know, every time I hear that song, it feels like my mother is still here. She is, Liam replied. Every time you remember her, every time you play a note she loved, she's there. Elena nodded slowly. Then maybe I should learn it properly. He raised an eyebrow, smiling. You want lessons?
Yes, she said a little shyly.
From you? Liam chuckled, shaking his head. I don't think I'm much of a teacher. You taught me more in one song than anyone else ever has, she said sincerely. Please, I want to learn. He hesitated, then nodded. All right, sit down. She laughed softly, half in disbelief, and took a seat beside him at the piano. It felt strange at first, in the heiress and the janitor sitting side by side, both touching the same keys, but somehow it felt right. Start with middle C, he said gently, guiding her hand. Now slow down. Don't fight the keys. Let them speak. Her fingers stumbled, producing uneven notes, and she winced. I told you I'm terrible, he smiled. Everyone is in the beginning. Just listen. He played the melody softly, the same song her mother had written. The notes flowed like water, gentle, pure, and full of emotion. Then he paused and nodded for her to try again. This time her hands moved with more care. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Liam smiled approvingly. Better, he said. You see? It's not about perfection. It's about feeling. Elena looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, Liam, for everything. He shrugged lightly, though there was warmth in his eyes. You don't owe me thanks. You just had to find your song again. She laughed softly. Maybe I did. The sky outside had turned dark, and the room glowed with soft golden light from the chandeliers. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just sat there side by side, letting the music speak instead. Finally, Liam stood up, gently closing the piano lid. You should go. It's getting late. Elena nodded, but before leaving, she handed him the folded letter. This is for you. Don't open it now, read it later. He looked at it curiously, then took it with a polite nod. All right. As she turned to leave, she looked back at him one last time. You know, she said softly, that night when I laughed. I thought I was the one in control of everything. But I was wrong. You were the one who held the room. He smiled faintly. Music has its own kind of power. It doesn't need permission. Their eyes met, calm, respectful, and full of quiet understanding. When Elena finally walked down the grand staircase and out of the hotel, she felt lighter than she had in years. The night breeze brushed her face and she smiled to herself. In the ballroom above, Liam unfolded the letter after a long pause. Inside, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for reminding me who I want to be." He smiled quietly, folded the paper again, and slipped it into his pocket. Then he turned back to his work, humming softly, the same song now carrying a note of peace. The night air was cool and gentle as it brushed across the grand hotel. Weeks had passed since the gala. The night everything had changed. The story of the janitor who played like a master had spread quietly through the city. Some said it was a miracle, some said it was a mystery, and some forgot it entirely. But for Elena, it was the night she finally saw truth. And for Liam, it was the night he was finally seen. Since then, life had moved forward, but differently. Elena still attended events and charity meetings, but she was no longer the same woman who only cared about how she looked or who noticed her. Something inside her had softened or perhaps awakened. She began spending her mornings at the old piano in her mother's studio, practicing the melody that had changed her life. Her fingers were still clumsy, but her heart was open, and that made every note beautiful. Sometimes she would smile, remembering Liam's patient voice. Don't fight the keys, let them speak. One evening, her father entered the room while she was practicing. He leaned against the doorframe, listening quietly until she finished. You've improved, he said with a small smile. I had a good teacher, she replied softly. He raised his eyebrows. The janitor? Yes, she said with a proud smile. Liam Carter. Her father studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Your mother would have liked him. Elena's eyes softened. She already did. He chuckled lightly. Yes, I suppose she did. He walked closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've changed, Elena. You look peaceful. She smiled faintly. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm actually living, not just pretending. Her father nodded, his eyes filled with quiet pride. Then maybe it's time you share that peace with others. The next week, Elena organized another charity gala. But this time, it wasn't for fame or luxury. It was for something real. She decided to dedicate it to her mother's memory, to music, to art, and to the beauty of simple souls who carried greatness quietly. When she told Liam about it, he shook his head immediately. No, Elena, I can't. I'm not performing at a gala again. But it's not the same, she insisted gently. It's not about fancy people this time. It's about heart, about truth. Please, just one song for her, for yourself. He hesitated, looking torn. You know how people see me, Elena. They'll never look past the uniform. She smiled softly. Then let them see what real dignity looks like. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he sighed and nodded. All right. One last time. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom looked familiar but different, softer, warmer. The chandeliers still glowed, but the light felt less proud and more welcoming. The guests were a mix of people from all walks of life. Artists, musicians, workers, and patrons. No one cared about who wore what or who owned what. Elena stood near the piano, dressed simply in an elegant white gown. Her eyes searched the crowd until she saw Liam enter quietly from the side door. He looked nervous, his uniform replaced by a plain black suit. He didn't look like a servant tonight. He looked like what he truly was, a man who carried music inside him. When she saw him, her heart lifted. She smiled. Ready? He gave a small nod. As I'll ever be. The lights dimmed and the chatter faded. Elena stepped forward to address the guests. Tonight, she began, her voice clear but emotional, we celebrate something very close to my heart, the music my mother left behind, and the people who remind us that beauty can come from anywhere, anyone at any time. She turned toward Liam. This song was hers, but tonight it belongs to everyone. Then she stepped aside. Liam sat down at the piano. The room was silent, that same expectant silence from weeks ago, but this time filled with warmth instead of judgment. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and began to play. The melody flowed like sunlight through the room, gentle, strong, alive. Every note carried memory and love, and for a moment it felt as if time itself had stopped again. People listened, not as strangers, but as one shared heart. Elena watched from the side, her eyes glistening. She could almost feel her mother's presence again, smiling, proud, free. When the final note faded, the room erupted into applause, not with surprise this time, but with pure admiration. People stood up cheering, their faces glowing with emotion. Liam looked overwhelmed, though a quiet smile crossed his lips. He stood and bowed slightly, his eyes meeting Elena's. She walked toward him, her heart full. You did it, she whispered. He smiled softly. We did it. Later that night, after the guests had left and the lights had dimmed, only Elena and Liam remained in the empty ballroom. The air was still, and the piano sat quietly under the soft glow of a single chandelier. Elena looked around and sighed. Do you realize what happened here tonight? People didn't just hear music, and they felt it. You gave them that, Liam chuckled. I just played, Elena. No, she said, shaking her head. You reminded me, what it means to be human. He smiled. Maybe that's all music ever really does. For a moment they stood in silence, just listening to the faint echo of the last song in the room. Then Elena spoke again, her voice soft but full of meaning. You once said music doesn't care where you come from, she whispered. Maybe love doesn't either. Liam looked at her surprised, then smiled gently. Maybe not. The chandelier above flickered softly as if agreeing with them. Outside, the The night stretched wide and calm. Inside, the girl who once laughed without thinking and the man who once cleaned floors without being seen stood her. Thinking and the man who once cleaned floors without being seen stood her. B-side, E-side. Equals, bound by a melody that had changed both their lives forever. And as Liam closed the piano lid for the last time, he whispered almost to himself, "The song ends, but the feeling stays." Elena smiled, her eyes bright with quiet tears. Always. The light dimmed, the room fell silent, and somewhere in the distance a soft breeze carried the echo of the final note, gentle, endless, and full of life.